So I'm going to talk a little bit about generative AI, and the title of my talk is Generative AI, Now is the Time to Ask. And by what that I really mean is, and I'll kind of come to the point right away up front, and then we'll go into some more details about that, is that I don't think fully people appreciate just what a prototype stage these new generative AI tools are. They are very, very, very nascent. And the people who are creating those technologies, the people who are developing other technologies with them, are desperate to get feedback from people who want to use these technologies in their businesses, in their activities, to make things better, to be very, very clear about exactly what you need the generative AI to do to work in your situations. I think sometimes we get a sense when we just see a technology, perhaps by a large company, and there's just a search bar, that we have a sense that we don't really have any agency in that. And the fact is, this technology is being actively worked so aggressively right now. This really is the time to fight, to get your voice heard, so that they can make the technology the way it will actually work for you. And so that's what I mean by now is the time to ask. Now is the time to ask these companies to adapt the technology, because they are adapting it. They want to adapt it. They're spending an enormous amount of resources to do this. And so that's kind of the main point of my talk. And so then I'll explore that thought a little bit further here. So obviously Gen AI has enormous potential, and in fact MIT, I encourage you to go and look this up, but they, not too long ago, sort of asked MIT people to write a bunch of papers on kind of the tremendous potential of AI, and here's just a list of them. And these are some really wonderful things that if any of them come about, it's going to be fantastic. Likewise, they did balance it with the fact that there's a sort of an equal number of papers that many of them are about opportunities, but they also are like, we do need to make sure that this technology gets shaped and made in the right way. And along those lines, let me just sort of add a few caveats here, which is, I in no way want to be viewed as a person like, well, we should just shut all this stuff down. I think where we are in the development process, it's completely appropriate for various entities, laboratories, universities, agencies, entrepreneurs, others. They have a really important role to play in helping society become smarter, a smarter consumer of this technology, right? And there are entities who that's their job, and they should be doing that as aggressively and as quickly as they possibly can, so that we can have informed discussion about these technologies. On the other hand, though, I will say, the experimentation and evaluation of any technology, the testing of technology is one thing, but the deployment of generative AI to actually do something is a separate question. And that question has to be thought of in terms of with the highest regard for the trust, safety, and security issues, right? So I think it's important to separate the research, the exploration, the just becoming a smart consumer, and then saying, okay, how is this really going to positively affect the activities I'm doing, the businesses I'm trying to develop? And finally, I think it's very important, particularly for people in venues like this, to be aware that there are so many voiceless people that are just, they have no input into this process whatsoever. Right? We here do have the opportunity to have input, and we need to reflect on that. We need to reflect on that there's a lot of people out there that are going to be affected by this, and it's our obligation to think about those folks, to try and reach out to hear as many voices as we can, so that we can make sure that we're just not making a technology that only a very small portion of society had any say about how it was being developed. So let me talk about some of the current common perilous uses. So I think some companies, in a desperate attempt to say that they're using large language models, have replaced a customer support call tree with a generative AI voice-activated assistant, which has essentially led to more people staffing call centers, because usually these generated AIs just leave the customer in an endless loop when the call tree at least produced to you at like a finite state, and then you say talk to. So we've all learned how to just say speak to a representative 3 times, and then we get a representative, and we usually just short circuit that. So in a certain sense, that was like something that just putting a generative AI speaker assistant in front of a call tree, that probably should have been thought through a little bit further, because it probably has resulted in the need for a larger call center than a smaller call center. Clearly, one of the biggest use cases is students cheating on homework, right? And to that, I found this wonderful quote from George Boole, the inventor of Boolean algebra, which is sort of the basis of all computing. And he wrote on many topics. And if you want to read a person who you can write a clear, logical argument. I mean, George Boole definitely was very capable of writing clear. And he says here, of the importance of early and frequent practice of original composition, it is scarcely possible to speak in terms too decided. Its highest advantage is that it teaches the pupil to think. Maybe the students don't know this, or we don't remember this. When we ask a student to write an essay on a topic, there's generally not a need for that student to provide society an answer to an essay, to that topic with an essay, right? The purpose is for them to engage in this exercise of knowing their own mind and learning how to formulate that. And so now, if you just want to have them use a generative AI to read it, then I think it's okay for us to use a generative AI to grade it. But we have to kind of maybe rethink what the purpose is of the long form written essay in education given this. And the question then becomes, is generative AI a calculator? There's people who argued when calculators came up, but the human isn't getting to do long division anymore. Is that a bad thing? Or is it something more? And I think we're having that discussion right now. Like, what is the role of the long form essay answer in an educational system? And sort of being deliberate about that, I think, is very important. And then, of course, some of the more, really more dangerous things, the misinformation problem, harmless clickbait, obviously one thing, exacerbating divisiveness, which we've all experienced, and human trafficking. And I will say that misinformation and students cheating are, without question, the overwhelming current uses of these technologies right now. I mean, generative AI was actively using these technologies even 2 or 3 years ago in their more nascent forms. So this isn't like some hypothetical situation. These are probably the dominant use cases at this moment. So having sort of done the usual doom and gloom, I actually am here to talk about the fact that I actually think most of these problems are actually quite solvable. And we've had some really wonderful things going on in here at MIT where we have engineers and legal people talking together, right? Because with a lot of these problems, there's sort of a race to the courtroom, which I think is pretty inefficient, right? That takes forever. And if you get legal people and engineering and technology people talking together, we can actually come up with some solutions to these problems. So I'm going to pose a couple of those problems and sort of then say, hey, I think there's actually some pretty simple ways to solve these. So in the more legalistic aspect, 2 of the big issues with generative AI are that it's not clearly compatible with the copyright laws governing most for-profit organizations. I think we're all kind of aware with that issue that, maybe a lot of copyrighted material was used to train the model. Does that mean it's producing copyrighted material when you're using it? Likewise, it's not clearly compatible with the plagiarism policies of most nonprofits. And if you look at, the plagiarism policies at most, universities or whatever, they actually do differ. They're not the same everywhere, but many of them are quite draconian, and it's pretty clear that there is no use of generative AI that could ever be compatible with some of the plagiarism policies at these universities. And fundamentally, this is underpinned by the fact that there's just a general mistrust of essentially what's sometimes been called sort of surveillance capitalism, the hoarding of data. As they often say, if you're not paying for it, you are the product, right? And essentially we've had this sort of transaction where we provide data to be used for selecting advertising, and in exchange we kind of some kind of service, and that's led to a lot of mistrust in the public. So I'm now going to sort of put forward some rather, we think, simple solutions to some of these problems. So one of the things we've done is we've developed what we call the human-to-human license, which allows for current standard practice that we use in open source or scholarly work, the normal things we do, but it just simply says, guess what? If you want to use this to train an AI, you got to buy it, right? You have to go and buy it. Because the fact is, most of the people generating the copyrighted work that is being used to train this stuff, their price isn't high. They want something. They want some acknowledgement that their work is being used. They want their work to be cited, the usual things. This is not a high price. And this just allows them to assert that right. Right now, a lot of the licenses are essentially silent on this question. And so we worked to put together a license where you can positively assert, hey, I'm putting this open source code out there in the same way that IIA has, but if someone wants to use it to train a generative AI and essentially strip the copyright and strip the license in that process, well, I'm going to affirm that that's not allowed, and you have to go and license that through a normal procedure. And I think if this became widely adopted, it would force organizations to go and get these copyrights. I don't think they're going to be that expensive to get, and it will become standardized. Imagine it's kind of like in the early days of music sharing, right? Well, maybe we need sort of a Spotify for code or something like that allows this to take place. So I do think there's a rather simple path forward to this. And we published this last summer, and we actually started seeing changes in the way that people were thinking about these topics. And so we're very pleased about that. And then on the plagiarism issue, I think the central fact is that current large language model technologies, in an attempt to make things easier, take a very multi-step process, right, and sort of smash it into one thing, which if you decomposed it and had human in the loop at each stage, it would not necessarily slow the human down. It would actually accelerate the process, because the end product they get would be something they could actually directly use, as opposed to something that they have to kind of vet and think about. And so, and in the spirit of, and this is what we encourage people to tell companies that they're buying LLM technologies for, is that, what I want, what my organization wants, is I want to be able to tell them to learn from just the relevant material in my organization. I want it to return highly accurate search results, from my natural language queries about just that material, right? I want to be able to select the documents it returns, right? It's essentially going to do search first and highlight, said, you asked for this before I go generate something. This is what I found. Because if the material it found was irrelevant, well, of course it would make no sense to hit the generative AI button, right? And so this is sometimes called search first. Sometimes this is under the name, retrieval augmented generation. I actually just think it's making that intra-search bar work in your organization. I mean, if you've been in a large organization, you'll always have that little window up there, and sometimes you put something in just for entertainment purposes to see how irrelevant a result that can come back. If large language models just made internal search work, that alone would be an enormous productivity savings. Because I think in most organizations we have a hard time just finding the documents that our organizations are producing on a particular topic. And then I think what people often want to do is, most long-form documents that you're writing are based on templates. I work with the government, and every single time you want to do anything, move people, money, resources, there's a memo that has to be written, And this goes through 12 steps, and there are 12 little long-form memos that get created in this process to kind of just affirm that, yes, this is being done for the right reasons. Well, what people would like to be able to do is say, okay, I've selected these documents. They're the new and interesting things I want. Can I upload a template document or a prior example and say, please update this document based on that information that you have found, and just have it return like a standard Microsoft Word review edit template where it just says, okay, it shows me what it changed. It has a citation why it changed it. And I can just say, yep, no, yep. That would be a tremendous productivity savings. And I think it's important, I'm just giving an example of what we would want, but I think it's important for all of us to tell the people who are developing these technologies, they want to hear this feedback. This is just an example of that type of feedback, but this is the kind of feedback we need to give to the developers of the technology so that they are making products that will actually work and enhance our enterprises. So just with that, I'll just kind of wrap up here and say, again, I think the copyright issue is completely solvable with these human licenses. That will just force the stuff to be licensed. It will cost very little money in the end. It will not be, a big cost. It will require some new business models perhaps to work out to make this efficient, but I don't think that will take very long to do. And then likewise, I think on the plagiarism or trustedness or the hallucination front, just decomposing the process so there's just a little bit of checking along the way really can make a product that's completely safe. If we had that kind of product I just described, we wouldn't really be even talking about hallucinations. If that has what been offered originally, I don't even think we're discussing the hallucination problem. I think we're just talking about how we're using it. So Gen AI technology is nascent. Now is the time to ask. Now is the time to ask companies to make them the products that you want.